Today, as you will have gathered, we are celebrating the Feast of the Holy Cross. It's a day which allows us to remember and to give thanks for the role of the cross in God's plan for the salvation of his people. A day of rejoicing, distinct from the sadness and the solemnity which accompanies the story of Christ's death on the cross on Good Friday. The feast day is, of course, associated with the pilgrimage of St. Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, who united the western and eastern parts of the Roman Empire under one emperor. In gratitude for his successes in so doing, Helena undertook, late into her 70s, the then highly risky pilgrimage to the Holy Land. There, she is said to have discovered the true cross, buried under rubble and the site of a new Roman temple of Venus. Constantine and Helena were so moved by this discovery that they built over the spot the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which was dedicated in September 1335. One part of the cross Helena had discovered was incorporated in this church in Jerusalem, one part taken to Rome and the third to Byzantium. And from the end of the 6th century, the Feast of the Holy Cross entered Christian liturgy, either on the 3rd of May, the supposed date of Helena's discovery of the cross, or on September the 14th, the day when the new church was dedicated in Jerusalem in 335. So what do we make of this whole story? Do we have to believe that Helena discovered the whole of the true cross, mysteriously intact after the Romans had razed Calvary to the ground and built their own temple on top? Many across the world do still hold to this as sacred truth. But others may simply view this as a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the cross on which Jesus did not just die, but, as we heard in our gospel reading, glorified his Father's name, and as he was lifted up on it, drew all people to himself. What seems to me extremely likely is that Helena's men did, at the very least, in fact discover the remains of crosses which had been used in the inhumane practice of crucifixion. We know that that hill outside the city wall was a popular place for execution, and as anyone who's seen the film Spartacus will remember, crucifixion was horrifyingly widely used for slaves who had run away from abusive masters, those driven to petty theft by desperation and starvation, or those who stood up against the injustices of the Roman occupation. The Gospel tells us in many places that whatever is done to the least of Christ's brothers and sisters, whether good or evil, is done to him. And in his crucifixion, Jesus deliberately shared the horrible fate of so many others. Our first reading from Isaiah echoes this vision that God shares in his people's pain. In all their affliction, he was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them. In his love and his pity, he redeemed them. Across the world today, people are still suffering for escaping from modern slavery, speaking out against injustice, or being driven to petty crime in order to feed themselves or their families. Christ's suffering on the cross reminds us of God's promises to walk alongside both us and them. In our darkest and most difficult times, we can be assured that Jesus shares our isolation, our pain, our grief, and the sense of hurt he must have felt on the cross. Before Helena's pilgrimage to the Holy Land, the most common Christian images were those of the Good Shepherd carrying a sheep on his shoulders, or the secret fish symbol. But as a result of her discovery, the image of the cross, previously regarded only as an instrument of torture and death, became the most common identifying sign of a Christian person, who rejoiced in the buildings, their places of worship, who carried the cross before their armies and had it on their flags. Living secretly in the vicarage for the last 3 weeks and walking around the parish, I've been constantly struck by how often, just above the rooftops or at the end of an avenue in the park, the cross on top of the spire of St Mary Abbots is suddenly visible. Holy Cross Day could perhaps prompt us to see that cross with fresh eyes, inviting us, both individually and as a parish, to keep before us the knowledge that in his suffering on the cross, Christ offered up his life self-sacrificially for us, and he still walks beside his suffering people today. As love and pity led God to redeem us through the cross, so too that same cross might prompt us to show love and pity, to walk beside others in their affliction, and to give thanks whenever we catch sight of it, that as Jesus was lifted up upon the cross, he drew the whole world to himself. Amen.